Jonaid is a Rohinga from Myanmar and a passionate journalist, human rights activist, refugee advocate, and survivor of the genocide against the Rohingya minority in Myanmar. Hoping to get to Australia, he fled to Malaysia and then Indonesia, where he was interned in the notorious Makassar detention camp for asylum seekers. There he organized protests across Indonesia that eventually led to improved conditions in those camps. Through sponsorship, he was able to resettle in Canada. John is a member of Northern Lights Canada, which advocates for refugees and displaced people. John is studying journalism at Mohawk College in Hamilton. So welcome, John.
Thank you, sir.
It's a pleasure to have you here. And you'll be reading from Voices of the Forgotten.
So this is the story I'm going to read. Voices of the Forgotten, a Rohingya refugee's journey to activism. Adrift in the middle of international waters, I watch in despair as my broken down boat sinks slowly, taking with it the hopes and dreams of those on board. People were fighting for life jackets while I lay at the back of the boat, praying and remembering my mother and all those back home. As the night descended and the big ship passed us by, I prepared to meet my fate, but the fate had other plans. The morning sun brought with it a glimmer of hope as I wake up to the sight of towering mountains. My journey had not ended. I was filled with gratitude for Australian Navy, who had rescued us from the brink of disaster. However, my trials were far from over as they towed us back to Indonesia, where I found myself locked up in a hotel by the Indonesian immigration officers, only to witness the brutal beatings and eventual death of a fellow Rohingya refugee. Three months later, I was then transferred to a bigger prison. When I entered the detention center in Manado, Indonesia, I was overwhelmed by the towering walls and electric fences. My heart was heavy with fear as I saw 100 more other prisoners whose life had been altered by the forces beyond their control. The immigration officers confiscated my money and phones. I was disheartened by the sight of hundreds of people waiting in the cells. At 19 years of age, I was now a captive, accused of a crime for fleeing violence from Myanmar in charge of safety and freedom. Growing up as a Rohingya Muslim in Myanmar, I had always felt like an outsider. I was constantly bullied and labeled as Kallar or illegal immigrants in my own country. The government, who denies the existence of a Rohingya ethnic group, consider us illegal or Bengali, therefore stateless, leading to daily discrimination, prosecutions. In 2012, anti-Rohingya violence had escalated, leading to the loss of close friends, relatives, and forcing me to flee to Bangladesh. However, safety eluded me as I was constantly on the run, moving from India to China and finally attempting to reach Australia. But my journey didn't end there. As I was arrested and sent back to Indonesia, where I was imprisoned, denied my basic rights in a life of hopeless limbo. As time marched on, hope began to die for refugees in Indonesia. At least 15 of them have taken their own lives, unable to bear the weight of despair. Meanwhile, hundreds more are left to suffer in mental institutions or physically impacted by the stress of their situations. I was one of them, trapped in this green hell. We call it green hell. I couldn't bear to see injustice any longer. I reached out to organizations like UNHCR, Amnesty International, but my letters were all unanswered. I even sought help from human rights groups, lawyers, only to be met with fear and reluctance to get involved. But I refused to be silenced. My journey as a refugee in Indonesia led me to become a journalist and activist, using my voice to shed light on the injustice faced by those like me. I had never imagined this path for myself, but the severity of our situation demanded it. And the more I uncover, the more I realize the true extent of mistreatment faced by refugees. I remember it like it was yesterday. The first protest we held in front of a UNHCR office in Indonesia. As a member of a group of 50 refugees, I was determined to make our voices heard. The protest caused quite a commotion, with traffic being disrupted and the media taking notice of our cause. Over the following months, we continued to protest, but our efforts were met with disappointment. None of our demands were met. Things were increasingly becoming difficult for us. Some of my fellow protesters were arrested, and I soon became the main target of the police. I was constantly on the run, hiding from the authorities. In an effort to keep the cause alive, I turned to social media, using my rating to share the stories of my fellow refugees. I wanted to investigate the Australian and Indonesian refugee policies. So I enrolled online courses to improve my journalism skills. That's when I met Kieran Cabres, an Australian writer who wanted to work with refugees like me on a writing project. He became my guide, editing my stories, helping me publish them in international media such as Al Jazeera, BBC Indonesia, and CBC News. As I gained recognition as a journalist and activist, my life became even more difficult. Threats were being made against me, wanting me to stop my activism or face imprisonment. As an engaged refugee, I had always felt a strong urge to make my voice heard. I could no longer stand by and watch the Indonesian government and NGOs ignore the rights of refugees like me. So I rallied a group of like-minded individuals, and together we organized the largest protest Indonesia had ever seen. Our demonstration echoed throughout the cities across the country, drawing attention to the injustice we face every day. The day of the protest, a government spokesperson was sent to meet us. He asked, "What do refugees want from Indonesia?" And I stood up, determined to make our voices heard. "What have you done for us besides supporting Australia's cruel deterrence policies? We are human beings. We demand our human rights." But the representatives was not receptive to our pleas. He informed us that Indonesia was not bound by the UN Refugee Conventions and that we could either stay or leave the country. "But if you continue to protest, you will face harsh measure," he said. The meeting only intensified the pressure on me as I refused to back down from the protests. I was told that I could no longer stay in Indonesia if I continued to speak out and write about the immigration and the government. Just as when I thought all the hope was lost, a glimmer of light appeared. My friend Stephen, a Canadian refugee advocate, is there, here, reached out to me with good news. He had found sponsors to resettle me in Canada. I was overwhelmed with gratitude, and my heart fills with hopes for a brighter future. But then, as I sat in my small room in Makassar, I couldn't help but feel hopeless. It was still 1 year away from my resettlement to Canada, but it felt like eternity. Little did I know that my fate would change in just a matter of hours. In the middle of the night, the authorities arrested me and interrogated me until morning. They presented me with two options: go to jail or leave Makassar. I chose the latter, to leave Makassar. But it came with a cost. I would no longer receive accommodation from IOM, International Organization for Migrants, or a monthly allowance. I eventually found myself in Jakarta. But as I waited for my application to be processed, I was met with another harsh reality in Jakarta. In Jakarta, I saw refugees begging for help on the street in front of UNHCR offices. With no shelter, excluded from basic human rights and services. I wrote articles which endangered my safety, always on the move, always in hiding. When the pandemic hit, the Canadian immigration authorities postponed the processing of applications, thus delaying my resettlement. But the Rohingya refugees in Bangladesh were already facing a decade-long crisis, to which a solution is still unknown, and they are still in search of safety. Then two boats carrying almost 300 passengers landed in Aceh. Aceh is in Indonesia. I was then hired by the UNHCR as an interpreter. But their situation was so dire that I could not do anything about it. I then published an article on BBC News to find help for them, which caused my employer to want me to stop writing. I left the job, and to my surprise, Canada opened its border, and my resettlement application resumed. In the meantime, the international community has started to pay attention to the situations of refugees in Indonesia. I was invited to speak at various human rights conferences, where I shared my story and the stories of those who were left behind in the detention centers. With the support of international organizations and media outlets, I was able to shed light on the mistreatments of refugees and the lack of access to their basic human rights in Indonesia. Eventually, Indonesian government was forced to address the issue, and several policies were put in place to improve the treatments of refugees. The detention centers were reformed, and the refugees were given access to better healthcare and education. Our voices had finally begun to be heard, and the world began to understand the struggle of those who had been once forgotten for too long. On September 30, 2021, I finally arrived in Canada. And I was warmly welcomed by my sponsor team at the Toronto airport. Joel Freeman and Julie Brells, who treated me like family, hosted me during my quarantine. I finally took a long walk to Toronto's lakeshore and feel the freedom of fresh air. April was a life-changing moment for me. I finally received my permanent resident card. It was a passport to a new world of possibilities. I could study, I could work, access healthcare, even become a citizen in the future. Since then, my life has been busy. I have made a lot of friends, and I'm always on the go. But the best part of my new life in Canada has been meeting Stephen. He is more than just a friend. He has been my rock through thick and thin. Whenever I face a challenge, he's there to help me overcome it. And he knows how to have fun too. He hosts an epic party for all the former refugees he has helped sponsor. For us, it's a chance to let loose, forget about the past, embrace our new lives in Canada. Natasha, over there, she is more than just another sponsor. She has taken me under her wings and become my mentor, helping me navigate my new life in Canada, showing me the way to brighter futures. Thanks to her guidance, I'm settling well and making the most of everything this amazing country has to offer. Although I'm grateful for this new life, there is still heavy weight on my heart. Every day, I think about the people I left behind and the ones who are still stuck in refugee camps and detention centers around the world. It is hard to enjoy this new life when I know that they are still suffering. They are wasting away without hope or dreams. Sometimes I feel guilty for being here while they are still trapped in these horrible places. I pray for them every day, hoping that someday they will be able to escape and find a better life like I did. But until then, my happiness will always be tinged with sadness, knowing that there are still so many people out there who are desperate for a chance to live in peace and freedom. In conclusion, my journey as a Rohingya refugee has been filled with trials and hardship, but it's also led me to become a voice for a change. My activism allowed me to empower others and bring about a shift in the way refugees are perceived and treated. I may have lost my home, but I gained a purpose, a community, and a voice to fight for future. The fight may not be over, but my journey had just begun. And I am ready to face whatever comes my way with courage, determination, and a strong will to succeed. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Thank you so much. There are many people here that don't know a lot about the Rohingya people. And I thought I'd ask you, could you briefly describe the culture, history, the religion of the Rohingya people?
Rohingyans are a group of ethnic indigenous people in Myanmar. They live in northern state of Rakhine State, which is border with Bangladesh. And I am one of the Rohingyans. So Rohingya is an ethnic group that have been subjected to genocide for generations and after generations. We grew up as a Rohingya in our own country with no recognitions of our existence. We are categorized as illegal immigrants in our own land. Growing up as a Rohingya in Myanmar, I never had my own identity as a citizen or a person who belonged to this country. In 1982, the military government has cancelled our citizenship and labeled us illegal immigrants who illegally crossed the border from Bangladesh to Myanmar. But we were not illegal in our own land. We had a kingdom of our own country. Our country was called Arakan, and we didn't belong to Myanmar or Bangladesh. We had our own country. But when the British came in, they took over the whole part of Myanmar, including our land, and make it as one country. And then the Burmese government took over the power, the military junta, and they were separating the land, recognizing all a state in Burma. And then they had this, discriminative policies toward the Muslims and also the Rohingyans, that they are not a part of Myanmar. So we had since become illegal immigrants in our own country. So what does it feel like to grow up as an illegal immigrants in your own country is that you have no basic right. I was able to go to a school and university. That's because I grew up in a city, but in many villages, there were no, a school for Rohingyans. So we were living in our own country without any basic right. We have, travel restriction. Yeah, so our life is like living in open prison in Rakhine State.
Right. Well, thank you for explaining that. Well, this was all very revealing. I appreciate you sharing your experiences with us, and appreciate you being here. And I feel enlightened by what you've told us. So I wish you the best for the future, and I'm glad that you've found some peace here in Canada. So thank you very much.
Thank you.